You're on the air with Florenza, your podcast destination for authentic conversations with a twist. So, grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and join me on this unique literary journey. Cheers! New York secrets don't stay behind closed doors. Joining us today is New York Times bestselling author Chris Pavone, who discussed his electrifying new thriller, The Doorman. Set in Manhattan's elite Bohemian building, this pulse-pounding novel delves into a night where class, privilege, and justice collide in unexpected ways. Please put your hands together and welcome Chris to the show. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining me on this episode of On the Air with Florenza, where we are going to have an opportunity to talk about you and your book, The Doormans. Now, we had a chance to chat offline, so we're going to catch up the listeners to where we are in the conversation. But before we do, we are going to toast to an amazing show. And I saw you with a glass earlier. And what are you drinking on your end? Is that water or are you faking water?
It's real water. I'm not. It's real water.
Okay, well,
Thank you for asking.
I've got
You've got it. What do you have?
You know what? I don't know. It's a blush something. I just kind of ran to the other side of the house and poured really fast and ran back. So cheers.
Cheers.
Now, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to listen to some of my previous shows, but I've started this really cool thing that I call intermissions. And I think it's going to probably eventually be renamed as happy hour because it seems to be more happy hour than intermissions. But it's me asking you random questions that we just have fun with. And you just say the first thing that pops in your head. And then we will show that as a reel. So are you ready?
I hope so.
Okay. Um, you once wrote the ending of a novel first, then worked backwards towards the rest. True or false?
False.
False. Do you ever write the endings first, or you just kind of go along the line?
I never write the ending first, but I tend to know what the ending is going to be when I start writing. But then often, in truth, I find out that I was wrong.
Isn't that great when that happens? Okay, true or false?
Yeah.
The idea of the doorman came to you while talking to an actual doorman. True or false?
True.
Ah,
That's true.
interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later. True or false? You edited cookbooks before becoming a full-time novelist. I'm going to say that's false.
That's true. I was a cookbook editor, and it was a great job.
Now, what got you into that line of editing? That sounds like fun.
Well, I got into publishing because I love books. I wanted to work in the book world. I did that right after college. I started working in publishing. And people tend to gravitate towards things that they're interested in the publishing world. And although I was interested in fiction, I was not really interested in being a fiction editor for a bunch of reasons. But
Uh-huh.
I did get increasingly interested in cooking. And it's very natural if you're interested in cooking to edit cookbooks. And nothing can make you a better cook other than being a professional cook than editing cookbooks. I read thousands of recipes a year. And although it was never my job to test them, just reading so many recipes, I learned how to make so many things without ever having made them. And so now if I go to a restaurant and taste something, I think to myself very often, if I want to make this at home, I can. I don't need a recipe. I've seen the recipe. I can go home and make it and add whatever was special in the restaurant to whatever recipe I'd edited 5 times before 20 years ago.
Nice. Now, what was the most unusual recipe you edited?
Oh my God, unusual recipe. I really don't know how to answer that, although I did a very long time ago, 25 years ago maybe, edit a completely raw foods cookbook. And all of those recipes were unusual.
Okay. All right. True or false? You've never read one of your published books after it was released, and I'm going to say that's true.
I would love for that to be true, but unfortunately, it's not true. And I've had to read a couple of books of mine in the process of trying to turn them into films or television.
Okay. All right. And last one, true or false? You outline every novel scene by scene before you begin writing. And let me see. Oh, I'm going to say false.
You struggled with that one. You're
I
correct. It's
did.
false. I don't outline every scene. Yeah.
Okay, now I have a totally random question because I'm looking at the light fixtures behind you to your right, and I'm estimating the age of the room or the home that you're in has to at least be before the 1910s, or how old is the home that you're in? I've not seen those lights for a long time.
1882.
1882. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Love it, love it, love it. So, we're going to dive in and talk about your book, The Doorman. And it has been called a modern day bonfire of the vanities. I love that description. What inspired you to set this thriller within luxury Manhattan apartment building? Ah, okay. And how much fun was that crafting the setting in that way?
When we moved into this old apartment 5 years ago, one of the first people we met was a doorman named Johnny. And working the door at this building was something that he'd done for 37 years. It's the only job he ever had, greeting people who live in this building and plenty of people who don't, and the tourists who are always outside, and the neighborhood people and their kids and their dogs. This guy had a warmth that you could see from across the street. People who moved away would come back just to visit him. And then he got sick. He spent a few months in the hospital. Um, and when he was to leave the hospital, the only thing he wanted to do was come back to work. And he did that
Oh,
for the next 2 years, holding the door and carrying people's bags and hailing cabs while also definitely dying. Before he got sick, we used to stand out in front of the building and talk every day about the Mets and the Yankees and baseball and anti-inflammatories and classic R&B of the 19th. And now we were standing out there and talking about God and the meaning of life and death. One day at the end of his shift, another doorman asked him how he was feeling. And he said, "I'm so tired, man." And he went home and he died. And he lived his entire life on the same block in Harlem. But he planned for his memorial service to be held a couple of blocks from this building where he did not live, so that the people he worked for could come to his memorial service. And he was buried in his full doorman uniform with the only non-regulation item was that he had a New York Mets pin on his tie. And that pin broke my heart. And in fact,
oh.
the whole guy broke my heart. And I wanted to write a book about this intersection of lives in a place like this. People who live vastly different lives coming together in a place where a lot of them live and some of them work, and we see each other every day.
That is so fascinating. And I want to give an alibi. I think you saw my little puppy here. She is so
I did,
disrespectful.
yeah.
She found her way to this side of the house. So hopefully she will behave. What a beautiful story just about humanity and the changes that one person can make in the lives of so many. What has been the most fascinating aspect of living in such an older apartment compared to perhaps living somewhere else?
Well, I think I've lived in something like 14 places in my life, houses and apartments, and the most recently constructed of any of them, I think, was built in about 1915. I have
Okay.
never lived in a new home, so I don't know what it's like to have things work. I don't know what it's like to have straight floors or windows that are not drafty. Um, I love old things. I love living in old houses. I love old light fixtures. I don't love getting old myself, which
Yeah.
is not fun at all, but it's obviously better than the alternative. And I've always been fascinated by New York apartment houses, and in particular, this sort of upstairs, downstairs nature, which you also saw in things like Remains of the Day, of people living together in very, very tight quarters who lead vastly different lives, other than the fact that they're intersecting in this one place and one time.
Of your characters in your books, who would
Yeah.
you most like to have as a neighbor, and who would you absolutely put a for sale sign on the stoop were they to move in?
That's a very hard question. In truth, uh, although none of my characters in any of my books is me, and none of them is based on me, they all have little bits of me in them, and they have little bits of other people I know and conversations I've had and conversations I've overheard. And I love all of my main characters. I really do. I
Uh-huh.
think that they're all great people in their own way, and that's why I've written about them. And they all have failings of a sort, and they all are challenged in some way. Because that's fiction for you, and also that's real life. I don't think there's any such thing as a perfect person. I'm certainly not. But I really would want to live next to any of my main characters. That said, my minor characters
Uh-huh.
very often exist so that I can hate them, so that they can represent something on the page that I absolutely despise in a way that you can't really go through life telling people, wow, I hate you. But you can do that on the page, and it's so fun. It's one of
Uh-huh.
the most fun things about being a novelist, I have to say, is inventing a person just for the sake of hating on them. The
So
blast.
all of them will put up a for sale sign.
Yes, yes, all of them would be a problem to live next to. That's the point. And there's one of them, there's more than one of them, but there's one of them in particular in this book. I tend to not really believe in villains, in truth. This is, I guess, a very personal belief, but I really don't believe that there are almost any really truly evil people in the
Yeah.
world and truly good people. I think that everybody is somewhere on a continuum in between. And I think almost everybody, even if I look at them and think, wow, that's a despicable person doing despicable things, I think most of us really are at heart doing what we think is best for something. And maybe that something is just ourselves. There are an awful lot of greedy people in the world, but I don't think that necessarily makes you an evil person. And the antagonist in this book, there are a couple of them. They're both the types of guys that I really don't like, but I don't hate these guys completely. I have some sympathy for their position in the world and their concerns. And I hope that it doesn't come across as that they're evil. I don't think they're evil. They're just people who, for one reason or another, for very specific reasons, have come to lead very different types of lives than the life that I would want to live. But that's a judgment and that's a choice and that's not a fact.
Mhm.
I think I probably digress. I don't remember what your question
No,
was.
that was
Oh,
perfectly said. Perfectly said. Now, of the two, writing biting satire or post-pounding suspense, which do you prefer to write? Or is it either or like both? It's like, oh yes.
um, I write suspense. That's my main goal in what I write. Is I've written thrillers, something that may be called a mystery, and a couple of spy novels, but they're all under the rubric of suspense, and they're all the types of stories that I think have you on the edge of your seat, and they all share this one thing in common, which is that at the beginning of the book, you don't really know what's going on. You
Mm-hmm.
don't know what type of story you're in. And then somewhere in the middle, you discover what's really going on. And then at the end, you find out that you were wrong. And that's the thing that I've been trying to do in all of my books. And that's the thing I think that I've done in this book as well. And that's all about suspense and misdirection, and leading readers along to really need to turn the page. And in this book, I think all of that is present, but I've also injected it with some more social satire and commentary because I think that the times demand it, at least for me, and the setting demands it. That the social commentary and the satire isn't there for its own sake. It's there because it serves the plot. That the plot is about very much revolves around social issues and the point that we find ourselves in America right now, where people just hate each other. And we live in a very, very divided environment. And even people who agree on 99% of things find themselves hating each other over the last 1%. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're broken. And I'm not setting out in the world to try to fix all of those problems. But I think one of the first ways that we address those problems is to identify them in the first place. And I think one of the ways that we identify problems is through art and culture and through films and television and books and plays. That's one of the ways in which we see, wow, all right, we're in a situation here. What do we do about it?
What has been the most eye-opening response that you have received from a reader or a fan or family member who's read either of your books, and primarily Doorman, although it's not out yet? What has been maybe from your betas or someone that just caught you by surprise, the response?
That's a good question. I think it not in the finished book, but in earlier drafts of the book, I was very surprised to find out that some people hated one of my characters who I loved. And I realized that I had constructed this character a lot in my head and a lot on pages of notes and a lot on character sketches I'd done. And then I moved what I thought were the most important parts of her into the book itself. But I erred in my judgment, and I didn't think carefully enough about the choices I was making of which aspects of her personality I was going to put down onto the actual page of the book. And I realized that for a bunch of external reasons, ways that I described her and her life and her husband and her apartment and her children and her mode of traveling and things like that, that there were all these external factors that I was painting that made people dislike her, even though the things she said and the things she did were all likable. And I realized that one of the things that I was trying to accomplish in the book was in fact highlighted by this situation where people were judging this character based on these external factors, based on her clothing, on the way she looked, on how much money she had, and not on who she was and what she was doing with her day.
Wow.
And how she was raising her children. And I realized that the very problem that I was looking to solve was proven by the fact that people were misunderstanding my intention here. So I had to revise her because I don't want people to hate this character. I don't hate her. I love her, and I want her to be flawed, and I want people to find criticism with her, but I certainly don't want them to hate her, and I hope that they don't. I don't think they do in the finished book, or people wouldn't like the finished book, because she's sort of the main character, even though the book is called The Doorman, and the doorman himself has a lot of pages and a lot of plot. I don't think he's the person who has the most lines in the book.
That is so powerful what you just said, because going back a bit to a comment that you were making in terms of how as society we have allowed that 1% of what makes us different to separate us. And it's so true, even with what you just said with the character in your book, that people miss the whole part of who she really is fictionally or figuratively based on those things that they didn't like. Um,
Yeah.
Now, the character that she was before you softened her, do you find that character speaking to you in such a way that she may make an appearance in another book under a different name, the non-likable one?
uh, no, I don't think so. I mean, I I feel like I've explored this type of character enough, and she's a very specific type of person. I would be surprised if I wrote about her again.
So, your books have won major awards and have been optioned for film or TV. How do you feel about adaptations? And do you ever feel that any of your characters or your plot was reflected differently in the adaptation versus what you originally created?
That's a great question. A few of my books have been in development in Hollywood for, in the aggregate, at least 25 years, probably more like 30, and none of them has yet made it to the screen. So I don't have the luxury of sitting here and complaining about how untrue the protagonist was to the book. And in truth, that's not a concern of mine anymore. And um, I have spent the past couple of years trying to adapt one of these myself. It's a book that's about 10 years old, and it's been in around Hollywood for a while. It was under option at DreamWorks to be a feature for a few years, and then under option at Netflix to be a limited series. And then the rights reverted to me, and I decided not to try to sell another option, but to try to develop it myself with the help of an actor who's a friend of mine who agreed to star in it. And we started working on it together with the goal of trying to put together the package ourselves. And I have never done this before, but it's been fascinating as I've worked to get farther and farther and farther away from the book to the point where I no longer care what relationship the film has to the book. The book itself was a starting off point, and the basic premise of the book is that a travel writer becomes a spy. But other than that, we've changed around. We've thrown away big characters and added new big characters and changed the ending at least 10 different times. And with each iteration, with each new person we add to the team, some agents and then a producer and now a director, everybody's coming to the process with their own ideas and their own ways to make this story better. And it's no longer what it has to do with the book. The only thing we're thinking of, the only thing I'm thinking of with each new draft is how can we make this a better film? And so little of that has to do with what's in the book. A book is any book, a novel like mine, is anywhere from 10 to 20 years worth of entertainment when push comes to shove. And that's why so many books make for a great limited series. But a film is really at most 2 hours most of the time. And there's just no way for the book to become a film. The thing to do is to really just take whatever you need from the book and turn it into an entirely new thing, and that's the film.
Wow, that was a master class in and of itself. That was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant because as creators and creatives, sadly, we do get so attached to that thing that we've created and we miss the big picture. And I think what you just did was to pull back the blinders and reveal the big picture in the whole process. And that was just absolutely amazing. What's next for you, Chris, in terms of the creative side? What are you working on outside of the anticipation of the release of Doorman?
Well, that's a lot, right? But that the film I just mentioned is something that I'm working on nowish. Some weeks go by when I have absolutely nothing to do, and then I get an email or a text from one of the people involved and says, "Can we meet sometime this week about the latest draft of the screenplay?" And I get on a Zoom that's 1 or 2 or 3 hours long with a few different people, and we're talking about how this change, one particular change we made to the last draft, actually influences this scene and this character and this character's backstory. And one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about this process with the film adaptation is how much time we spend rigorously discussing everything
Mhm.
in a way that just doesn't happen in books. I mean, for a book, I tend to have two or three big conversations, one with my agent and one with my editor, maybe a second one with both of those people. But I don't have this round after round, multi-hour, multi-person debate over every last detail. And I can see how after doing this for years and years and years, or a lifetime of this, it might get tedious, but it's brand
Mhm.
new for me and it's not at all tedious. It's much more focused going forward, which I started to do also to write my next book on being very, very deliberate about it and sort of anticipate these types of questions. And one of the biggest questions all the time, and something that I always try to remind myself when I'm writing, why is the character this?
Mm.
And if you can't answer that question, then you're writing something akin to nonsense. And I think very often when we find ourselves, find myself, I can't speak for you, really disliking a book or really disliking a movie or a television show, the thing that I'm disliking is that I don't believe that the character would be doing this, that I don't
Mm.
understand their motivation, that it hasn't been presented to me, or that presentation of it is nonsense. And I feel like one of the things that I've learned so much from working with these people and developing the film is to continue to focus on that. And not just for the protagonist, but for everybody. Everybody who enters every scene, we need to know why they're doing what they're doing.
Again, another masterclass. Now, let me ask you though, Chris, of your books that
Yes.
you've written prior to working on the scripts for TV movie deals, of those books that were already written, do you feel any of those characters kind of tapping you on the shoulder saying, listen, my friend, how differently would you have developed us had you had this information prior to writing this book?
You know,
Do you
that's a
have any
horrible
jealous
question.
characters?
You've asked some good questions, but I don't like that one. I don't want to go back and this is one of the reasons why I don't actually really read my books
Uh-huh.
again after they're published, except when I've absolutely needed to. Um, I don't want to look back like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to regret things. I don't want to criticize myself. I
Hmm.
don't want to try to second guess myself. Everything can be better. Every book can be better. Every movie can be better.
Yeah.
Every conversation we have can be better. Every person can be better. But I think if you spend too much time focusing on all the ways that
Hmm.
something should have been better, you don't move forward.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that hamstrings people when they're creating is trying to figure out the moment when you're finished. And finished doesn't mean it's perfect.
Right.
Finished means it's as good as you're going to get it in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
And at this moment, let's be done with it and move on with our lives. And
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to be able to recognize with a book. It's sometimes with a novel or with a draft of something, people are pretty clear about it. You spent one draft putting in commas and you spend the next draft taking out commas.
Yeah.
And then it's obvious to you that you're just wasting time and procrastinating because you don't want to get to the next stage where people tell you whether they like it or not. And that's a
Mm.
horrible thing to happen.
Yeah.
That's not something I think people want to happen. It's not something. If
Yeah.
you never get to that stage, you never produce the thing and you just sit around second guessing yourself, taking out the comments and putting them back in. So I don't really want to revisit my books, not as books qua books. I'm happy
Yes.
to revisit them when necessary. Say, all right, how can I turn this book into a limited series for television?
Uh-huh.
That's an interesting challenge. But reading through it with the guise of with the goal of looking for things that could be better, I think that would be sure. And I don't
Yeah.
want to torture myself.
That, beautifully said. Beautifully said. And you're preaching to the choir right there, my friend. You were preaching to the choir. So I am taking some notes if you weren't listening. If you weren't writing, Chris, what would you be doing?
Oh, I'd probably be an editor. I love being a book editor. I really did. And I think, especially being, I mean, I can't speak for being a fiction editor because I never really did that. But a nonfiction editor at a big publishing house has a very, very enviable job. Everybody who you're publishing is a leading expert in their
Yeah.
why they're writing a book. That's why there's an audience for the book. That's why I, as an editor, was acquiring the book. And the interesting thing that I discovered as an editor is it doesn't matter what the thing is that they're writing about. Everybody who's a leading expert in anything is a fascinating person. Those are all people who are more passionate about their subject than anyone else in the world. And even if that subject is something as esoteric and maybe unimportant as Italian wine, the person who knows more about Italian wine than anybody else is a fascinating person and a great person to be in business with and have conversations with and work on a book with. That those were very, very rewarding experiences for me. I love that part of being an editor, that part of constantly meeting new experts in their field. And there's also uh, being next to fame involved in being a book editor. And for some people, that's a very compelling thing. For me, it was not the fame so much that was compelling, but the expertise that was compelling. That's something that I really enjoyed. That people were famous in their own little world as the go-to person. I love those people, and I loved working with them.
It's like being a star shiner. The star is there, and you're shining it up and helping them to shine brighter. I love that.
Exactly, uh, all the people who are experts in their field, they may not be experts in my field, which is making books. And I didn't feel like I was just completely shining the star. I was definitely there to help them, but it was with help that they very often needed. That just because you're an expert in the field doesn't mean that that expertise is transferable to writing a book or publishing a book. That those are also very specific things that if you don't know how to do, you don't know how to do.
Correct. Correct. Where are the listeners able to interact with you and engage with you and learn all things Chris?
Oh my God, all things Chris. I think all things, it's only my wife and my dog who know all things Chris. And I think that's the appropriate universe.
Yes.
I have a website, which is myname.com. And I send out semi-monthly, I don't know, semi, it's not the right word. I send out monthly newsletters, but I also skip months. And sometimes I send out two in a month. It's a little bit irregular. And those are the main ways. I'm not super active on social media, but I do exist there. And I will be out in the world doing public events for the Doorman, and those dates and locations are all on my website.
Wonderful. We've come to the part of my show that I have rebranded multiple times, but is officially called Last Call. And
That's exciting.
I know, yes, it was one for the road. It's been a lot of things.
Yeah.
And it's just some rapid fire questions that are designed just for you to answer without having to put a whole bunch of thought into it. So, are you ready?
I don't know. We'll find out. Now you've scared me a little bit. At first it sounded exciting, and now I don't know.
It's
Well, go ahead.
simple. Trust me, it's simple. What's
Okay.
your writing kryptonite?
My writing kryptonite.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I don't know. That's very hard. I don't what kryptonite meaning it defeats me completely.
Yes, or it challenges you, it causes you challenges, it gets on your nerves, it something.
Gets on my nerves. Uh, I really don't know. There's no part about it that I feel really gets on my nerves. I guess the thing that comes most to getting on my nerves is after 10 drafts or something and a year or two of working on a book, we're in second pass typeset pages, and I discover that there's still a typo. And that typo was my fault, and it's been there for years. And I've read that sentence 50 times, and there's still a misspelled word in it. And that drives me bonkers. And it never fails to happen.
Yeah, I think that's all of ours, no matter what you're doing. You could be typing a text or 500 word novel, 500,000 word novel. Yes, that'll fit. Coffee or tea while you're writing, or neither?
Coffee nonstop. I think tea tastes like
trash.
But I love coffee.
What's your favorite crime novel of all time that's not your own?
I will tell you the most important crime novel of all time that's not my own.
Ooh, I
Call
like
it a
that.
favorite because I can't rank things in terms of favorites. I get
Okay.
so much out of so many different books. But when I started working in publishing in the early 1990s, I worked at Doubleday. And at the time, Doubleday's rent was paid by our annual John Grisham book. And those were the
Mm,
first commercial contemporary bestsellers I'd ever read in my life. And until
mm-hmm.
that point, I only read literature with a capital L. And here I was working at a commercial publishing house, and I needed to read these commercial novels because it was my job. And it was eye-opening. It was eye-opening that I sort of had a prejudice against what I thought bestsellers were. And then I read The Firm, and I was amazed at how much enjoyment and entertainment could be packed into one book. And it's a type of magic that I've come across very few times in my life as a reader and in my career as a writer and as an editor. The magic that happens when somebody discovers how to write a book that you absolutely cannot stop reading. And it doesn't happen that much to me. It's only happened a handful of times, I think, in my life where I'm reading a book and I even say this to myself, why can't you put this goddamn thing down and go to sleep? And sometimes you just can't,
You
but it's
can't.
rare. Yeah.
Nice. And last question. You've written over 30 novels plus.
No.
No?
Wait, stop. No,
How do I have you? Oh,
I don't
listen.
know.
I speak it into existence. Speak it into existence.
Okay. The Doorman is
Listen.
my sixth novel. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Whew. Look, I tell you what, I got so caught up in your other answers because I'm just like feeding my soul over here. Okay, let me get with the
Yeah.
program, Florenza. All right. With all the writing that you've done and to include editing for others, what do you do to ensure that you keep your personal stories that you want to tell fresh in your mind?
I never stop looking forward to the next book I'm going to write and then the book after that.
Mm,
And I'm always in the process of not only working on a book, but also jotting notes for the next book or the next book that I'm constantly putting down character notes and filling up pages and documents with plot points and character names and things. And I don't try to shove everything into the next book. I know that there will be a book after that. And I think one of my frustrations early on in writing my first book was I was trying to get everything I had to say into one book. And it wasn't until I realized that there should be others. There will be other books that I don't have to get everything into this one book. The only things that should be in this book are the things that belong in this book. And just because I've had a great idea doesn't mean it's a great idea for this book. So put it in a file of notes, save it for later. It will be useful 5 years from now or 10 years from now. If it's useful, then if it was useful now.
Yeah, that is so true. It'll be useful then. That is amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining me. This has been so much fun.
I agree. I've had a great time. Thank you so much for having me.
And this wraps up another episode of On the Air with Florenza. You may follow me on all social media platforms under Florenza Lee or via my website at florenza.org. Until next time, cheers.